Hey, welcome back to the channel. If you're just getting started in music production or mixing, today's tutorial is aimed right at you. It's Mixing 101. We're diving deep into the top 3 must-known plugins that form the absolute foundation of any great mix in any genre. And those 3 are EQ, compression, and reverb. All right, let's dive in. All right, so first up, let's talk about the equalizers or the EQ. This for me is the most important tool you need to get to know. At its core, it controls the frequency balance of a sound. It cuts out mud, removes harshness, and can add clarity. And it also helps every instrument get in its own clean space in the mix. Now, there are different types of EQs out there, but for today, I just want to talk about 3 main EQs that is commonly used when mixing, especially when you're beginning. So we have a parametric EQ that basically lets you surgically adjust specific frequencies and makes it easy to boost or cut those frequencies. We also have graphic EQ, which uses fixed sliders for a broader, more tonal shaping approach. Then there are analog emulators. In this case, we have Logic's Vintage Console EQ, which actually emulates the Neve 1073. But for today, I'll be using a parametric EQ, which is the FF Pro Q3. Let's look at the different filter shapes that this EQ has to offer. First, we have our bell shape, which is used for targeted broader cuts or boosts of a certain frequency range. This is a great filter shape for targeting muddiness. We have a low shelf, which is excellent for broad shaping of the entire low end. Then we have low cut, which is a high pass filter that allows for completely removing unwanted low end, rumble, and noise. Here we have our high shelf, which is used to cut or boost the upper frequencies for air or brightness. Then here's our high cut, which is a low pass filter. It gives you control over precisely rolling off the high end. Then we have a notch filter, used for surgically removing a very specific unwanted frequency. This is where the Q option is essential. Q controls the bandwidth, how broad or how narrow the notch filter is. For example, making the Q very narrow lets you target one specific problematic frequency. Making it broader lets you target a larger amount of frequencies. It's also important to note that most EQs let you cut or boost anywhere from minus 24 dB to minus 30 dB. In this case, we can cut all the way down to minus 30 dB. Now I'm going to play a string passage. As it loops, watch the screen and listen as I demonstrate each Q shape in action so you can see and hear the effect. Next up, let's talk about compressors. Just like EQs, there are many different types of these, but let's just talk about 3 types that are commonly used a lot when mixing. We have VCA, which is great for instruments that have more low end. We have FET, which has a faster response to transients and can have a warm sound, which is really useful when working with drums, guitars, or vocals. And we also have glue compressors like Logic's Vintage VCA, which emulates the SSL G-Bus compressor by Waves. But what I really want to dive into is the threshold, ratio, makeup, attack, and release knobs. If it's your first time using a compressor, these knobs can seem overwhelming. So let me explain simply what each does. So here the threshold controls the volume level in decibels of where you want the compression to begin. For example, if you set it to -10 dB, any signal that goes above -10 dB gets turned down. If you set it to -20 dB, any signal that goes above -20 dB gets turned down as well, and etc. and etc. So for the ratio, it also controls how much the signal is turned down, but in a different way. For example, a ratio for 2:1 means that every 2 decibels that goes over the threshold, which means every 2 decibels of your signal that goes over the threshold, only 1 dB is allowed to come out. If we set the ratio to 5:1 and the audio signal exceeds 5 decibels, the compressor will only allow 1 dB to come out. And if we set the ratio 10:1, you guessed it, the compressor will only allow 1 dB to come out. So basically, if you have a low ratio, the more subtle and smoother your sound is. The higher the ratio, the more compression and squashed your sound gets. The attack controls how fast in milliseconds the compressor attacks or clamps down on the signal. The release knob controls how fast or slow the compression stops, allowing the signal to return to its original volume level. And the makeup gain brings the overall volume back after compression. So if your sound begins to sound too low due to the compression settings, turn up the makeup gain to make up for all the lost volume. Let me loop this drum and percussion section now. I'll play around with the threshold, ratio, attack, and release knobs so you can hear the subtle and sometimes drastic changes a compressor can make. One more thing I do want to mention is the mix knob. This enables parallel compression or New York compression. This basically lets you blend the compressed wet signal with the uncompressed dry signal. Personally, when I'm doing mixes, for the most part, I suggest that you start with the mix knob between 90 to 100% and just adjust it until you get a nice, even, and clean sound. Now let's talk about reverb. So just like EQ and compression, there are tons of reverb plugins out there, like convolution reverbs, which uses IRs, impulse responses, to simulate real spaces. And then we have algorithmic reverb, which use math to create spaces. Regardless of the type, reverb is important because it creates the essential sense of depth and space in your mix. Let me show you the basic controls of what makes up most reverbs. Here I'm using Valhalla, which is one of my favorite reverb plugins. So here you can see the mix option, which controls the balance of the wet reverberated and dry original signal. Here we have the pre-delay, which simply controls how much of a delay you want it to affect your signal. Here's the decay. It basically just sets how long the reverb tail or sustain lasts. Here we have the high cut, which helps shape the tone to make it how bright or how dark the reflection sounds. And here's the depth. It sets how close or far away the sound feels in that space. I'm going to play the brass section of this trailer track. Listen closely as I mess around with these main reverb options so you can hear how we can go from a smaller space to a massive cathedral sound. Finally, I want to circle back to compression and specifically discuss glue compression. The simplest way to think of how a glue compressor works is that it makes your mix sound clean and cohesive. Again, I love to use this glue compressor on my track stacks, which again are the group of instruments routed to one track, and on the main stereo out track. So I won't talk about the threshold, the ratio, attack, and release knobs since we already discussed that. What I will give you is some of the suggestion settings I use for when gluing tracks and the mix together. So let's start with the track stack and how I glue all those instruments together. For my glue compressor on the track stacks, I like to set the threshold at around -10 dB. The ratio varies between 3:1 to 5:1. The attack, I like to keep it fast, and the release, I like to keep it short. But do keep in consideration, this does depend on the genre and type of instruments you are mixing. Now on the stereo out, which controls the full mix, I like to keep the threshold at around -10 dB, the ratio between 3:1 to 4:1, the attack between 10 and 15 milliseconds, and the release at about 50 to 200 milliseconds. Again, this totally depends on the genre and the sounds you are mixing. So watch the screen and listen to the synth section of this trailer track as I turn the track stack's glue compressor on and off. So even though it's a bit subtle, you can hear that when I bypass it, it goes from loose to when I activate it, it sounds really tight and cohesive. Now listen to the glue compressor on the stereo out track. When I toggle it on and off, you can hear the whole mix go from being slightly disconnected to a cohesive professional sound. So that's pretty much it. Those are my 3 top plugins I recommend for anyone starting out in the world of mixing. I know from experience that all these options and knobs for these plugins can be a bit intimidating at first. But the more you practice with these plugins, the more comfortable you will feel and you will learn to understand them. So just practice, trust your ears, and in no time you will up your mixing game. So alright, thanks so much for sticking around. If you found this tutorial helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you have any questions or comments about this tutorial, just leave a comment down below. Thanks again, I'll see you in the next one.